Free socks.
You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Writing Community Chat Show. We are very excited to be here and Chris Hooley's on time, everybody. What a fantastic week it is. How are you doing, Chris? How's your week been?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Made an effort to make sure it was on time today. So yeah, thanks for finding that out. But
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, was that something to do with my tweet where I sent you the link and said just in case you're on time, but probably not?
Yeah, I did check that about 10 minutes before we were due to come on, so that was probably a good time for it to come through. Because yeah, I may have been late again, unfortunately. But yeah, brilliant. We're all here, ready to chat.
We've got another great guest on, and what I like about tonight's guest, and also we do the introduction and all that stuff. We had a really good guest in Abiola last week who is one of the most inspirational guests we've had in terms of facing adversity and beating those doors open that were closed in her face and just persevering throughout the hard times and actually getting the result that she rightly deserved. And today we've got another guest who took a lot of turns to get to their path. And I think it's really good that we're having these sorts of conversations because it means that there's a lot of people out there that relate to that, including us, who really work hard and hit those sort of barriers and doubts. But suddenly there's light at the end of the tunnel from stories that we've learned and on this show. And I think it's really good. And I've just been a little bit distracted from Anna, who says, "Big day, someone mark it on the calendar."
Yeah, I thought that was initially, I thought that was a big day, as in what have we missed, but she's been sarcastic there because I'm on time.
So, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Anna. I thought that was like, something big was happening, but Chris being on time kind of is a big thing.
Yeah. Well, Chris, this week I've been doing the cold showers again. That I would recommend them to anyone. I'm going to sound like a bit of a preacher, but get in under a cold shower because this week, obviously, it's getting darker and everything, and people are starting to feel a bit moody. But me, I've been walking around all week with a smile on my face. I've been happy as Larry, and the time that I spend in the shower in the morning is getting longer. I'm staying under the cold for longer, and it makes you feel incredible. Honestly, get them in your life.
I really appreciate your comments and the results you're having and the enthusiasm you're sending my way. But trust me, when I get in the shower and I turn it down, and I did try this, the swear words that come out of my mouth are just horrific. And I don't want to do it.
Just breathe.
I just
breathe. Honestly, breathe it through. And I did some writery stuff this week as well, which is cool. So this show, obviously, we get some really good book recommendations occasionally. So somebody recommended this. I can't remember who. I wish I could, so I could note them. But Monkeys with Typewriters. They said it was the best book on writing that they'd read. And when they said it on the show, I wrote it down. And then I thought, that's going in my Amazon basket. So I got that. Obviously, there are other people and places where you can buy books from. And then I had a weird moment. I watched a bit of a romantic comedy. And I bought these two books. Save the Cat writes a novel for young adults. And then writing romantic comedy. So, yeah, that's my plan, I think. Next year, I think I'm going to write a romantic comedy for the YA audience. I'm going to try and get my love for La La Land and mix it with sort of my love for A Fault in Our Stars and create something next year in that field. So, yeah, motivation for over Christmas to read those books.
Amazing. I do love it. I saw you tweeted that out earlier and they look great. And hopefully people will enjoy the recommendations. And I did keep my mouth shut. I did. But Anna says, don't base it on La La Land. We've had that conversation plenty of times. Anya says it's Native American Heritage Day. So yeah, I hope that whoever that relates to, that they're enjoying that day and they're having a really good time. Hello to you, Anya, to Anna, and hello, Scott Howdy. Great to see you here. Talented author. In fact, most of our audience is our talented authors, so please do check them out. But great to have you in the house tonight, and we're going to speak to our guest very soon. No news for me, Chris, in the writing world this week. And there wasn't really anything gripping, so I thought I'm not going to shove something in there. But those 3 books you've got, I think, are great recommendations. So potentially we can link those in the description, which we'll do at a later date. So if you are interested, and maybe Chris can find out who said that. I can't remember either, but we'll do that if we can. So are you ready for tonight's guest, Chris?
I am. I'm really looking forward to it. I feel like we've had a whole host for like the past 5 interviews of just really inspirational, like really engaging people that I feel like I learned a lot from, and made me emotional as well at times. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to tonight. I'm looking forward to you introducing our guest.
Yeah, not too much pressure on the guest, mind. Emotional and inspiring.
No. Everyone's been great.
Well, what's really nice is our guest has got a lovely open fire behind her. Very jealous. Last week I was freezing. Luckily, it's a bit warmer this week for me, so I'm not too bothered, but the fire looks brilliant. So once again, as I mentioned, we welcome an inspiring guest this week. Abiola last week. Please do check that out. I thought it was brilliant. But this week with a similar kind of journey, which is fantastic. So Cathy's journey is one of transformation, resilience, and a deep love for storytelling, which we love. And from her beginning as a journalist, covering everything from supply chains to football, or as you call it in America, soccer, to running her own successful PR company, and now an award-winning author, Cathy has continuously reinvented herself. Her debut novel, The Girl in the Maze, captivated readers and won the Agora Books Lost the Plot Work in Progress Prize. Now with a reissued version titled, now Chris can point, The Girl in the Midnight Maze, Cathy brings up an enthralling story of motherhood, trauma, and uncovering the secrets of the past. Cathy also wears many other hats. She is the owner of Kemptown Bookshop in Brighton, a champion of local authors, and a director of the creative writing program, nurturing the next generation of writers. So we'll be exploring her incredible path to writing, diving deep into her latest release, and of course, answering your questions, especially those Substack members, in the Q&A segment. So please join me in giving a nice, big, warm welcome to Cathy Hayward. Hello, Cathy.
Oh, hi, Chris. Really
yes.
Here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, you are very welcome. And if it saves the Chris and Chris issue, CJ, you can call me if you like, or anything you like, as long as it's not too aggressive. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. As you said, I have quite a warm back because I have a fire behind me, which is really lovely. So I've got my glass of wine, and I'm looking forward to chatting to you guys.
Amazing. Where in the world are you coming to us from tonight?
I am in Brighton on the south coast of England, so I guess about 50 miles from London. Yeah,
Brighton is kind of well known for being a bit of a social party kind of atmosphere, isn't it?
It totally is. So it's where people have birthday bashes, hen do's, stag do's, all that kind of stuff. So it's a bit quieter at this time of year. So between sort of October and April, it's get back to the locals. But certainly in the summer months, it's a busy old place, and the beach is always thronging. And it's a great place to live.
Yeah, it sounds it. We had a beer made for us for our show once, and it's amazing. But it's from Bison Brewery, which is in Brighton. But they made us our actual own show beer.
Yeah, in fact, that is amazing. Just down the road from the bookshop. So
yeah. We'll have to make a tour, Chris, and come and say hello. Yes, so Brighton, a place for people to celebrate and enjoy themselves throughout the year, and definitely in summer. But what's it like for a writer? Is there much of a connection there? And obviously you work alongside writers. So is that kind of a general thing, or is that something you've built in your kind of work setting?
I think there's always been a big writing community in Brighton. It's a big creative space, so it attracts a lot of journalists, writers, artists, and musicians. So I think it's the gay capital of the UK. It's a very liberal place. So it's a fantastic place to write. We have some good writing schools down here. We've got some great bookshops. Obviously, Cape Town Bookshop is one of them, but there's some other great indie bookshops, and it's a great place to be.
Yeah, and without being a bit rude here, I think Brighton is known for also its kind of older population. Is that a thing?
Yeah, I think to a degree. Yeah. I grew up in Worthing, just along the coast, and that's definitely kind of retirement, or used to be retirement central. I think it's a bit cooler now, but there's Brighton is a really mixed, diverse place, and I think that's what makes it so special.
Do you think that kind of feeds it into authors, or maybe that community of people are more leaning towards a specific genre of kind of readership, or do you think it's kind of, because of the diversity there, it's kind of an open kind of field for local authors to kind of work with?
Pretty open, really. Just certainly in terms of what we sell in the bookshop, it's really varied. We have a lot of stuff around political activism, a lot of like literary fiction, a lot of eco fiction or climate change fiction, and books. But it's hugely diverse. The only thing that doesn't sell well in the shop is stuff about royalty. I say it's not a great monarchist central city. So when Prince Harry published Spare, it took us, I think, about 3 months to sell one copy. So it was a big seller for us. But apart from books about the royal family, generally it's really diverse, and people buy quite a lot of experimental fiction, I'd say, as well. So which feeds in well for writers.
I was kind of like whinging to Chris earlier on social media. I've only sold 8 books in like a week. I'll take that. I'll take it. Prince Harry, I've outsold you. Go on.
In my bookshop.
Yeah, but I guess like political is kind of very, very busy at the moment, but also climate, as you mentioned. There was something was in the news I nearly talked about, Chris, and that was the Edinburgh Book Festival, I believe. There was a massive walkout because of the sponsors of the festival. Was to do with I can't remember who it was, but it was something to do with their sponsors were to do with fossil fuels. So there was a big walkout staged, and that was really interesting. So I think now is a great time for that sort of genre book. And what's it like in my mind? I wouldn't know, I'm not a personal reader of that genre, but is there a big amount of authors selling those types of books?
It seems like it's a lot more than certainly there ever used to be. So there's books which have climate change as their kind of central force in fiction, and there's books which just have that as kind of part of the story. But certainly I'm seeing a lot more of those types of books. I guess it is becoming its own genre, like everything does. But we'll see a lot more of it.
Go on, Chris. Oh, sorry. Let me just jump in there. I'm excited to talk about this a minute. Right. So is there a genre of book since becoming a bookseller that you're very surprised sells more than they do, or as much as they do?
Experimental fiction, I was surprised, because I don't particularly read experimental fiction. I used to just read a lot of historical fiction, which I love, a little bit of literary fiction, but I kind of stuck in my kind of historical fiction genre. And then you suddenly realize there's a whole load of other stuff. And like dystopian fiction sells loads, and I thought that was more of a YA thing. Absolutely not. Sells loads. So I think dystopian and experimental fiction just and also a lot of we sell a lot of books in translation, a lot more than I thought we would, particularly by Japanese and Korean writers. So that's been opening for me.
Very interesting. Sorry, Chris. I jumped in there.
No, my question was kind of going to be a bit of a mix of obviously having experience of all three, being a creative writing and in the creative writing coach sort of section and field, being a bookseller and being an author. Like, what sort of unique perspectives do you think you've learned from experiencing all of those elements?
I think certainly as a bookseller, it's been really interesting to understand like the business of books. Because obviously as a reader, you pay your $9.99 or whatever it is, and you get your book and you enjoy it. And then as a writer of books, I felt I was at the other end of that spectrum, and so I write the books and then get the opportunity to sell them at the end. But I didn't really understand much about that bit in the middle until I took over the bookshop, and to see where the money goes, and obviously how little of it goes to the author. But how hard it is to make money out of books in terms of actually selling them at the end of it all. So since I've taken over the bookshop, the minimum wage has gone up 20%, I think, in the UK, but the price of books hasn't gone up. So we get squeezed, and we're trying to. So we have to diversify into other areas, into like stationery and coffee and cake and stuff like that, to kind of keep going. So I think I've perhaps got quite boring about book selling, just because I do see it as a business. I'm trying to kind of make a living out of book selling, and it is tough. But yeah, it's interesting to learn more about that.
That is fascinating to hear that, because we don't think about that when you look at the rise of the minimum wage, that sort of thing, compared to the prices of books, as you mentioned, don't move. So do you think authors in that case, and we all agree and all know how hard it is to market a book, especially the writing community and indie authors, and even publishers, pumping tons of money into a book and then hoping to get that back. Do you think the style of how that book is sort of published and advertised has changed because of that kind of difference?
I think there's a lot more, obviously, competition from Amazon, who have a completely different route to market than most other booksellers and publishers. So obviously, Amazon as a distributor, but also Amazon publishing as a publisher. So I think that has changed the way a lot of people do things. I see a lot more traditional publishers now doing a lot more online advertising and social advertising, which I don't think they did quite so much before. I think the amount, even if you're going to go and buy a book from an independent bookshop, you might still go on Amazon to research books and see which one you want to buy. So I think places like Amazon and like Waterstones and bookshop.org and organizations like that have a huge role to play in how people are choosing books and enjoying them.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Especially for how we adapt our own sort of selling points. And for most people these days, it is easier to go down the online route. But like, there was a lot of stores that used to kick around, and even where I live, like, I'm sure Brookers, was that a place, or Bookers? I'm not sure. There was a place that used to do like coffee and sell lots of books, and then they've all gone. So it is difficult, and indie bookstores, I think, are becoming one of those things that people, it's like, what's the word? So nostalgic, and people like that, and they do like to go to bookshops.
And every time people come into our bookshop, they'll always say, "Oh wow, I just love the fact that we've got this little bookshop in our little village." But I think you're right. You have to diversify. You have to spend a lot of time supporting local authors, because that's our kind of bread and butter. But I think there's also a role about the role that we play in communities, and libraries play this role as well. But we're quite a kind of safe space. So we are quite close to the Royal Sussex, which is the county hospital. So we'll get a lot of people come in before or after appointments, perhaps after bereavements. People come in, like doctors and nurses, in their lunch hours, and just kind of wander around and use the space to kind of chill out. So we try to be as really inclusive as we can, to provide a space that the kind of community can use as well. And we do like free events in the evening, which are great for local authors, but also great for the community, because it's somewhere you can go and you're not kind of pressurized into spending money.
Amazing. Right. We could talk about this for so long. So, Chris, I'm going to jump us back here, because we haven't done the part one yet, which is the road to writing. We want to find out about your writing and your journey, because that's going to be really interesting for us. So the book world is amazing, and what you're doing is amazing, but we want to find out more about yourself in terms of being a writer. So once we come back from part one, the little video, we want to find out what your inspirations were and how you got on the journey you are now. And we're quite aware that, being a journalist and then moving on to where you are now, there was quite a few moves involved in that. So we're really intrigued to find out. So after part one, hopefully we can hear all about it. That's not part one. This is part one. It was such a close little difference in clicking that button. Part one. Okay, Cathy, what were your inspirations before you were feeling like you were a writer? What actually made you step in that direction? And that path you're on that's been up and down, how did you get to where you are now? I mean, not going through all in detail, but do you remember those steps?
As you said, I was a journalist, and I've always written, albeit kind of for corporations and for magazines and stuff. But I've always wanted to write a novel. I've been a massive reader all my life, and it was always a dream. In my 20s, I started writing bits of novels, but they were just awful. And then I turned 40, and I thought, if I don't actually do this now, it's never going to happen. So I took a 2-year writing course, which promised to take me from zero to hero. And somewhere in the second year of that course, I realized what I was writing was not a kind of individual exercises that we were being asked to do, but actually kind of a part of a greater whole, which became my debut novel. So I finished the course in mid-2017, did nothing for about 9 months, put the half-finished book aside, and then kind of thought, I've really got to kind of crack on and do this. And then spent probably about 18 months working on finishing it. I hired someone who'd been my tutor on the course. I hired her as an editor to look through it and give me some advice. And so that went back and forth. And it was probably, it was mid-2020 during the COVID lockdown here in the UK. And she said, you should put this book forward for a prize that I found out about. And it was called the Agora Books Lost the Plot prize. And it's for people who had a kind of work in progress, but they were kind of struggling with it a bit. And the deadline was the following day. So I put my book in for that, and quite a few other competitions as well. And I got on the long list, then I got on the short list, and then I won. And part of the prize was to meet an agent. And the agent didn't like what I was writing particularly, but I also met a publisher, and it was Agora Books themselves, and they took me on, and I got the publishing deal for that book. So that was kind of like the road to publication. But in terms of the inspiration for the story, just before the course started back in 2015, my father had died. And so I kind of started the course kind of still in a bit of a state of shock. And then about 6 months later, my mother died, and that was quite unexpected. So I had all this kind of, I don't know, feelings and thoughts and kind of grief going through me. And I hadn't got on very well with my mother at all. And when I was cleaning out her flat after she died, I was kind of looking around thinking, gosh, I really wish I could understand kind of the sort of person she was and why she was like she was. And I thought, actually, that would make a great start for a book. Imagine if I found a family secret in her flat, which I didn't, sadly. But it was the start of what was my debut novel, was a woman in her estranged mother's flat finding a family secret.
It's actually surprising how many times we've heard a similar story where, and including last week's guest and my own, where a bereavement in the family has almost spurred on that creativeness. And it's there may be something more to it with my ignorance. I'm not entirely sure why, but it does seem to be a bit of a pattern. And I love the idea of you kind of searching that and getting the inspiration from that, because I think life stories can be so much more beneficial in the story where you put those real feelings into the story. Did you feel like perhaps that was a bit personal when you were doing that, or was something you were fine with?
Yeah, I think it really was personal. And I think the first draft of it was too personal. But then I worked with the editor to kind of tone it down and make it less about me and more about characters, and that those characters became then different from me and my mum and family members. So I then wasn't worried. And of course, my mum had died, and by then everyone of that generation in my family had gone. So I didn't think I was going to kind of offend anyone. And then looking through the book now, because obviously I had the chance then to re-edit it and it became a different book, there's not actually much of my mum and I in there at all. So even if she was alive and read it, I wouldn't feel concerned about her reaction. It's a mother-daughter. It's a difficult mother-daughter story, really.
I'm pretty sure Chris has got a question there about your education in the book world, because you always seem to do that, Chris, and I think you nail it on the head. So when you want.
Well, you're kind of on the right lines. I was going to say, obviously you're a journalist, so clearly you can write. So what made you think I need to go on a course to learn how to write? Because it always intrigues me when people go, I'm good at doing this thing. I've got this passion for this thing, but I'm scared for doing this thing, so I need a teacher. So what was the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, maybe you're right. It was a kind of lack of confidence in my writing. But I think there is a massive difference from being a journalist to writing fiction. And I think I spent the first term always trying to look at what the truth was and trying to find the truth of something. And of course, in fiction, the truth is kind of whatever you want it to be. So I had to kind of unravel myself from always wanting to look for facts, and that took a while. I just think without the discipline of a course and having weekly deadlines to do things and having a kind of a bit of a writing community on that course, there was I think 10 of us by the end. I don't think I would have finished it because 90,000 words is a lot of words to churn out, and I think my enthusiasm might have lapsed and life would have got in the way. So I think I'd invested the time and the money in doing a course, and I was like, bloody hell, I've got to finish this book and get it out there. And even if it hadn't got published, I thought at least I would have finished a book and written a book, which would have been great.
I'm going to ask sorry, Chris. I was going to ask a question on the back of that, because obviously you've said as a bookseller, you've seen a massive rise in sales of experimental fiction, but then obviously working in the creative writing field, they tend to, anyway, universities and courses tend to use structures to give people a base and a platform. So I'm kind of wondering from that point of view, is the rise in experimental fiction due to the sort of the structure and the rigidness of courses, and then when people escape them after they've learned the basics, they are then expressing themselves in ways that are different and unique?
Yeah, I kind of like that. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, possibly you're right. I guess it's a little bit like grammar, isn't it? We all learn grammar and ways of expressing ourselves and writing at school, and then you can go away and do something completely different. And I remember always being taught you mustn't start a sentence with and or but, and I write a lot of sentences now starting with and but, and I split infinitives and all sorts of stuff. So maybe if you do go on a course, and of course you can write a novel without going on a course, you go on a course and you see the structures, the traditional structures that are used, and you think, actually, sod that, I'm going to just do something completely different. And maybe that helps. I mean, some of the people who've come out of the course that I did have written experimental fiction, and some have written other stuff, or more traditional fiction, I guess. So yeah, I guess it's interesting, isn't it, to see what people end up doing, and you kind of end up writing the book and the genre you want to write. I think that you're interested in reading rather than something completely different. I'm not sure I could write experimental fiction particularly.
I do think there's often a value learned from working maybe on a course or on something similar with a bunch of other people, because you learn from other people. Do you remember anything specifically that kind of helped your writing journey based on the people that you kind of worked with?
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you that actually critiquing other people's work is really valuable, because you have a distance from their work, and you read it and you can see some of the mistakes that they've made. Like, a lot of people go in and out of different points of view without noticing it, including me, and I can spot it in other people's work, but I find it hard to spot it in my own. So I think you become so much of a better writer by reading and critiquing some of your fellow students' work. So I think that's a massive thing. I remember reading one of my fellow students had written a whole piece in like a stream of consciousness style, and I was like totally taken away with it. And I just thought that is just incredible. And I haven't yet done anything like that, but I'd love to, because it was just really impressive what he'd done.
Amazing. Yeah, it is good. We've had a lot of debates on the show, haven't we, Chris, about kind of life experience versus the academic route. And there's a lot of people that lean one way or the other. But I think generally life experience generally comes up on top.
You've got to have something to kind of inspire you to do something. I know people write amazing novels in their 20s, but I just wouldn't have been able to, because I had nothing really to say. It wasn't until I got older and had gone through some stuff that I found like, oh, this is what I want to talk about.
So a big part of your journey was leaving London and moving to Brighton.
Mm-hmm.
What was the catalyst for that? Why did you take that leap?
It was a really boring reason. I had two children and I couldn't afford to buy a house in London because house prices were too expensive. So I thought, actually, let's move back to the south coast where I'm from, where, I mean, Brighton is expensive, but it, in comparison to London,
Oh, yeah.
not so crazy. So I could afford to buy a house down here. So it was really as simple as that.
Yeah, and you can drive around Brighton. It's not too bad compared to London.
You don't have to the car in Brighton, to be fair.
Yeah. I always believe that things happen for a reason, and that can be good things, bad things, whatever that kind of journey is. Obviously, what happened to you in that journey of moving down to Brighton is worked well for yourself and getting in the book world and all that sort of good stuff. Do you kind of feel that way, or is it something that you just strategically planned and plotted almost? I feel like?
I am a plotter when it comes to novels, but not really with life, I have to say. So yeah, I was a journalist when we left London. I left and just left my job and decided to set up a PR agency. And I did that for, about 10, 11 years. And that was amazing. It gave me a lot of flexibility and things like that, and allowed me time to write as well, which was fantastic. But yeah, I don't know whether I would have gone down the route that I've gone down if I was in London. I don't think I'd been able to afford to buy a bookshop, that's for sure. So yeah, it's and I guess the writing community in Brighton is obviously smaller than in London. It's more concentrated in one area, so we all kind of get to know each other quite well. And I wouldn't have had that really great community that I would have had if I'd stayed in London. So yeah, it was a great move for my family too.
Yeah, I love that.
Cathy, talk us through a stereotypical day in your life. Obviously, you're juggling all elements of the book world. What does a day look like, and what tips could you give to somebody if they were managing an equally sort of, I'm going to say chaotic, but obviously I don't know if it is chaotic, but I can imagine it's quite challenging to navigate all these different avenues. So what advice could you give to somebody?
Okay, so I think the most important thing is to work out when you are at your best in terms of your writing, when you're most creative. For me, that is early in the morning. So quite early on in my writing career, I guess, or journey, I developed an early morning writing habit. So when I'm writing first draft, I get up at 5 a.m. and I write from 5 till 7:15, 7:30, and then I get on with the day job. So that I feel that then my writing gets the best part of me out of the day. So I'll have 2 hours solid writing, quite a lot of copy, and by the end of that, I aim to do about 1,000 words in that time of a first draft. And it's quite a rough first draft, but I just kind of write it down and see what happens. And then it depends what I'm doing then. A few days a week I will be in the bookshop, so I will then pack myself up and get off to the bookshop, and we have a cafe as well. So I'll either be making coffee or serving books, or a mixture of both, and chatting to customers. And yeah, it's a fantastic job. Sometimes I'll be working from home, and those are the days that I'll be working on the creative writing program, which I can do anywhere. And if I'm doing like a second draft or editing or something like that with a book, I often go to the library, because if I'm at home, I will eat myself to death in the snack cupboard. So just get involved with like stuff like washing and cleaning things. And I'm not a really keen person on washing or cleaning things, but any kind of distraction from actually writing. So I'll go to the library and stay there. So yeah, for me, the week is either bookshop, working from home on the creative writing program, or the library.
It's interesting. Anya says, I also write best in the morning. I usually write after breakfast and coffee, while Mr. Anya takes the dog for his second walk by breakfast. That's impressive. What I find, Cathy, is that personally myself, and this could be related to a lot of people, it might not be, but your creative, I guess, amount comes from one pot. So if I'm working really hard on the show, my creativeness for my writing is kind of less. So in your kind of industry, you do a lot of things in the creative industry. Does that kind of take away from other things? Do you someday get really good in your writing and get loads of that out, and suddenly you're feeling tired for the rest of it? Or are you kind of in a situation now where you've got everything down to kind of a fine art?
I definitely don't have everything down to a fine art. But I agree with you that I think creativity is finite. And of all the shows and podcasts and blogs I've listened to and read about the writing process, most writers seem to do like 1,000, 2,000 words a day. And even if they're full-time writers and they're working for sort of 7, 8 hours a day, they don't necessarily seem to do that much more. It's just probably better and more refined. So it does feel that creativity is finite, and you then need to go away from it. But when I go to the bookshop, I do a lot of other stuff. So I'm making coffee. I spend a lot of time doing like latte art and stuff like that. I'm chatting to customers about books that I've loved, or I'm pricing up greetings cards. So it's like a different part of my brain, really. It's quite a practical thing to do. And then if I'm working on the creative writing program and I'm perhaps writing a blog for the website, or I'm talking to potential students, or we do a lot of events as well, so I might run an evening event with them. So it's a kind of different part of my brain. But yeah, I definitely get knackered. If I'm getting up at 5 a.m. and I'm running an evening event, I'm just broken.
The big question is then, as someone who's a coffee expert, I guess, what is your go-to coffee?
So we have it's a local roastery here in Brighton called White Cloud, and they do the most delicious coffee, and it's kind of like rocket fuel. So I run as well as working from home on my own at 5 a.m. I also once a month run a 5 a.m. writing club in the bookshop. So open up the bookshop at 5 a.m. I have to get there at 4:30 to turn on.
Wow.
And about 20 other writers will come and join me, and we'll just sit there quietly working on our novels as the sun comes up. And it is the most magical thing to see everyone doing that. And I make a lot of coffee on those mornings.
Chris, we need a trip to Brighton, for the morning of coffee and writing, and also for the nightlife. It seems to be a good show, feature. I think that needs to happen.
Make sure you do the nightlife after the 5 a.m. club.
Well, yes. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. A question I was going to ask there is kind of like getting into the sort of like nitty-gritty of writing, I suppose. So I was going to mention, has your dialogue improved since being in a public space so often? And if so, what tips would you give to someone to improve their dialogue? And then I was going to ask on the back of that, what's your favorite part of being a writer, and what's the worst part of being a writer?
Okay, so the dialogue piece, definitely, because I stand behind the counter cleaning up, after making coffees, and you can see like 2 people sitting there, and it's not just dialogue actually, because you can see they're obviously listen to their conversations, but you can also see all their interactions, what they're not saying, like the couple who come in who on the surface look like they're a really loving couple, and then you just see all these little small gestures and little things and looks, and you think, oh, actually there's something going on there. So it's great for understanding more about like show not tell and how to do things. Today I was in the cafe, and a group of much older ladies came in, and they were talking about the assisted dying bill, which obviously is being discussed in Parliament at the moment, and it was really interesting. The conversation was hilarious conversations they were having about it. So yeah, for dialogue and for actions, just watching people, it's amazing. The best thing about being a writer is just being a writer, being able to write. And even if I wasn't published and didn't have a book deal, I would still write. I've got a second novel which never made it anywhere, that my agent hated, but I loved writing that novel, and I think it's up there with the ones that have got published. And the worst part is, I think, the money, because there is none. But you do it for the joy of it. So and I think the joy is like you see, you get your book and you've got your book in your hand, and it's just like a part of you going out there, and it's wonderful.
I really do feel like a lot of people who try to make it as a writer might forget the fact that releasing a book is a real achievement, and that is something that we must cherish. And like you said, holding your book in your hands is something amazing. And yes, like you mentioned, we might not get much money for it, and most of us don't, unless you magically land a 6-figure deal, like some few people do, not often. you've just got to enjoy the process and enjoy the fact that you're making people's lives better. Have you had many people come into your 5 a.m. Writers Club or into your coffee shop, bookselling club, bookshop, and be a big fan of yours?
I don't know. People say they are, but you just
yeah.
So I once
just because it's polite.
Yes. So quite early on, when I had taken over the shop, someone came in, and so we had 2 members of staff, one upstairs for the cafe and one downstairs. And my colleague downstairs had sold this lady a copy of my book, and she came upstairs with the book in a brown paper bag and ordered her coffee, and I made her coffee, and then she sat at a table and started reading my book, and I was just watching her. I brought over the coffee, gave it to her, and I just sort of stood watching, and eventually she looked up with a kind of like, oh God, what is this woman doing? And I was like, that's my book you're reading. I don't know, and she I think before that actually I said, are you enjoying that? And she goes, yes, this is what an amazing start. She goes, I'm really into it. And I was like, that's my book. And then it all became a bit awkward because I thought, oh God, what if she actually decides that this is not the book for her? So I went downstairs and my colleague took over. So because I was too embarrassed. But
well, the fact that she said she loved the start is perfect. I mean, yeah. Imagine she turned around in that moment and said, "Oh, I picked this book up, but I just hate it." You'd be like,
well, I said, can I have a refund?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be bad.
For the coffee or the book? Yeah, cool. What we're going to do is, because we're chatting away, which is always great, we're going to move on to part 2, which is what's the story, and we're going to talk about The Girl in the Midnight Maze. I love the cover. I'm really intrigued about the rewrite of this and why it's become from an award-winning book to now a re-release. I'm really intrigued about that as well. So, The Girl in the Midnight Maze. Could you read us the blurb, or have you got a pitch for this book when we come back?
Yes, I will do that.
Excellent. So, part 2 coming right up. What's the story? Cathy, what's the story, please?
So, for decades, Emma Bowen has hoped she and her mother Margaret might find a way back into each other's lives. Even as a child, her strongest connection to her mother was a painting Margaret created before Emma was born, of a little girl lost in a maze. So when Margaret dies, gifting the painting to a total stranger, Emma is consumed by grief for her mother, the little girl, and the relationship they never had. Clearing out her mother's seaside flat, Emma is faced with a mountain of possessions and paperwork from a life she knows so little about. When she discovers something that throws doubt over everything she's ever been told about Margaret's past, Emma must decide whether to pull at the thread of secrets and lies. Will the truth help her through her grief, or reveal a loss that runs deeper than she ever imagined?
Yeah. This is a book, by the way, that is currently #1 in the bestsellers list on Amazon for 20th century historical fiction.
Hurrah.
Hurrah. Absolutely. Yes, this book was a rewrite of The Girl in the Maze.
Yes.
It did win awards. Yeah. So why first of all, in sounds fantastic, but why did you suddenly think this needs more work and I want to get this book back out there?
So the first deal I had was with a very small publisher called Agora, and they were amazing, and I don't think I'd be where I am now without them. But very soon after they published The Girl in the Maze, they decided actually they wanted to close down what they were doing and focus on something else entirely. So they were an imprint of a literary agency called Peters Fraser's Dunlop. So they closed down Agora, and the rights to The Girl in the Maze reverted back to me. So basically I'd gone from the joy of having a published book to actually not having a published book at all. So it went back to me, but by then I'd got a literary agent, and she said, I'm going to sell this book back out there. I really believe in this book. So meanwhile, I wrote a second book, which she hated, and then I wrote a third, and she said, yeah, I like this book, and I will be going out there and selling this book, and I'll sell The Girl in the Maze at the same time. Now, The Girl in the Maze started, it was quite a brutal start. It started in a bath in a flat in 1930s London with a woman thinking about having a self-abortion. I got the publishing deal I got was with Amazon Publishing, Lake Union, and they wanted to sell it in the US, and they knew that they couldn't sell it with a book starting with a self-portion. So they said, if you know, we want this book, it's a great story, but we can't do that. So they said, oh, well, we'll just edit it, or I will edit it. So they came back to me and they said, it'll just be light edits. And actually it turned out I kind of rewrote the story, because what I'd written in 2000, gosh, I guess it came out in 2021, was a book that I'd actually started writing in 2017. And it was quite out of date, perhaps. It was, I'd written it pre-Me Too movement. And some of the story was, just not what I think is kind of accepted now. So I had to write quite a different story. It's the same sort of story, but it's just different points of view. And it was a really fascinating process doing it. And I think it's a much better book as a result.
Do you feel like, as a writer, that you've evolved over time as well? Because that's something I feel like a lot of us do feel like. So that when you came to that rewrite, you could see errors or perhaps areas of improvement while you were doing that re-edit.
Yeah, totally. And isn't it wonderful to have the opportunity to do that? Because you don't often, usually the book is gone and that's it. But yeah, I could go back and thinking, oh my God, and in the meantime, I had written 2 more novels. So I definitely improved as a writer in that time. So yeah, I was a bit kind of sulky about it at the beginning, but then once I started doing it, I was like, actually, this is going to be totally much a better book.
Do you think, you may have seen this or not, but do you think you learnt any lessons from Write 1, Write 2 in that sense? Like you learnt that this would be better by this, and is something you could pass along as a tip?
I don't know what I learned really in that, apart from I think I'd written, even though it had taken me like 5 years to write, I think I hadn't kind of thought more deeply enough about it. And deeply enough about the characters and their experiences, and to make I think the key thing that didn't work perhaps in the first book was the character wasn't likable enough, the main character, and people they just thought, oh God, she sounds like a bit of a cow. And that's like the idea that with a protagonist, you might think that the protagonist is a bit of a cow, but you've got to really passionately feel that. So to make a character likable or really dislikable, but not just a bit, nah, I don't care. So just right characters better, I think.
A tricky question then. Probably what Chris is going to jump in and ask. Sorry, I'm very verbal today. How do you make a character more likable then, if you feel like that is not the case?
I think I was too much inside the character's head before, and I didn't kind of think about what the impact of what she was doing on other people, and how other characters, and how they would perceive her. So I think actually thinking, rather than just sitting inside that character's head and only ever seeing it from that character's point of view, is to understand how she would appear to other characters, and therefore how she's going to appear to readers. So yeah, just a little bit of perspective. Perhaps what we should all be doing, a little bit more self-reflection.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really intrigued because it sounds to me like the first book was very emotional. Obviously, everything you've talked about that you went through at the time, you sort of put into the first draft. And then the second draft sounds a bit more business-like. I don't know if that, you come at it with a different sort of angle, different attitude. I'm doing this with this book. So what advice would you give to somebody in terms of if they've got a really great idea like you had, and they're really passionate about it, and they've got that, like you said, opening scene, really quite a shocking opening scene. How could they manage and navigate the two of real passion, real shock factor, this is different, this is new, this is great, and then the business side? How could they merge those two together now that you've been through that and done that experience?
Yeah, I think that for me, I would always start by just writing a first draft, and that works really well for me. I write quite an untidy first draft and use all that passion and that kind of inspiration to get that story down the page, and then I think I go back to it with more of a business head on and be like, well, is this working? how does that feel? I've got to change that around and whatever. But I think the creativity and the inspiration bit has to come first. For me, anyway, that's kind of what works. I know a lot of people will do very tidy first drafts and they'll kind of edit as they go, but that's not me. So I think you need your inspiration bit, and then you need your editor hat on, and that works. So.
Do you know, like you? I mean, this again. You feel free to tell me you don't want to answer these questions, but
Sure.
The bit where you said I was annoyed at first, and that sort of change. Obviously, you had the passion and sort of belief in the first draft of the book. Like, this is what I want to present to the world, and it went out there and won an award. So obviously, it was good enough in its own right. So how did you navigate that process of somebody challenging something that was so instrumental for you the first time round and that made your book unique? How did you then turn around and go, right, okay, I can see what you're saying, and I'm going to navigate it like this? Like, what was that like? I just want to try and drill down onto the, even the moment where it flipped for you.
So it was, obviously they said they wanted to buy the book. They said they wanted to make some small edits, which I was kind of fine about. And it was small edits all the way up to the point that they sent me the editorial letter. And I opened it on a Friday, and they sent the covering letter with it, the covering email with a bit of a warning. And they said, oh, well, there's a little bit more than small edits. And I thought, oh my God. And I opened it up, and it was just like 3 pages of basically, this has all got to be changed. We can't have this character written from this point of view. It's got to be from the woman's point of view. And yeah, it was all message. And I just thought, oh God. And I didn't even really think about whether that was whether they were asking what was right. I just thought that's a whole ton of work. Yeah. And I had just come out of editing another book with them. So I was a bit edited out, and I also needed to earn some money and focus more on my day jobs. So I was a bit like, oh God. So I let the weekend go by, and I didn't even think about it. And then on Monday, I got up at 5 a.m., read through the letter properly with a clear head, and thought, actually, I can see where they're coming from, particularly with the stuff they're selling to the US market, particularly because the world had moved on in the kind of 6 years since the book had since I first started writing the book. So yeah, it wasn't an instant thing, but it took that weekend for me to be like, oh my God. And once I started editing it, I really got enthused, because I thought, actually, this is so much better.
I've got a question on this, okay? And you mentioned it, how you process that, but a fear of mine would always be, if my books did ever get picked up in that sense, when the edits come back, I know it'd be a lot of work. And you highlighted the fact this is a ton of work. What was your initial process to take what you have, which in your mind would be like a smooth process? This is my story, but I've got to take it all apart and change it and put different things in. How did you initially attack that adaptation of the story?
Well, in an editorial letter, there was kind of, I think, 4 kind of main changes in the plot. One of which was we don't want some of the scenes have been written from a male point of view, and they said we want to write those scenes. We want to see that from the female point of view. So that was a relatively easy thing to change. But others were, as I said, they didn't want to have a self-abortion in it, which I understood for the American market. They didn't like the beginning of the novel at all, and they wanted new scenes. And they actually said, why don't we start with Emma, the protagonist, in the kitchen? And we want to see her looking after her children, whatever. And I had said quite sarcastically to my agent, oh, we'll just have her like peeling potatoes for mash. And my agent said, that's a really good idea. You could start there. And I was like, oh, what?
I was being sarcastic.
And then actually the first line of the book is something like Emma was peeling potatoes for mash, and it actually worked. But there was So what was my Yeah.
Did you ever question it though? Because you had that lady in your coffee shop talking about that she loved the start of it, or was that the revised start she loved?
No, that was the original book.
Yeah. So the original story, she loved the start of it, and then your editors are telling you they want to change it. Did you ever think you might be wrong?
Do you know what? I think you kind of have to trust the publisher with it, because because they know so much more about it and the market than
Yeah.
I do. So I know about the story and I really believe in the characters, but they know the market, and so I really do trust them on that. And so
That's the professional answer. Well done.
Yeah, I did. I mean, there was
And you've always got the option. Yeah, you've always got the option of doing like the Taylor Swift thing of going Cathy's version.
Yes.
You know, just bringing it out at some point in the future.
Yeah.
I like that.
Love it. Let's get into some community questions.
Part 3 of the show coming up, guys. If you have questions for Cathy or for us all, or for us individually, just throw us some random questions, but hopefully for Cathy, send them in now and we'll try and answer them, generally writing based, but think outside the box if you want to. We'll get into that. And part 3, community questions coming right up. So get in the chat and send your questions. Thank you. So, Cathy, I'm very intrigued by your answers because before we came on the show, you mentioned you've been discussing some of these questions with your family. So prepared answers are always good ones. If you could change the ending to anything, any story, being fictional, TV show, film, or book, what ending are you changing and why?
Okay, so a couple of years ago, a fantastic book called Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan came out. And the film has come out, and I saw it last week, so it's been in my mind, and I sell a lot of copies of this book in the bookshop. Now, the ending, a lot of people, I think the ending is fantastic for this book, but a lot of people say that she kind of copped out a bit with the ending, and it's just when she ends the story when the story is actually about to begin. I think for me, that's the power of it. But I want to see what happens if... because the story is that a coalman has rescued, in Ireland in the 80s, he's rescued a girl from the Magdalen laundries, and he's taking her home. And he is about to destroy his entire family's life. And the book finishes on the doorstep of the house, just as his wife is about to see him with this girl. And we know that his children won't get into the school because the nuns will be against them. He's going to be shamed by his whole community. And the book ends at that point. And I want to see what happens. So it's not so much, I guess, a changing of an ending, but I want to follow him into the living room where he sees his wife, and his wife sees that he's rescued this girl, and see her reaction. So what happens? I know lots of people were frustrated with Claire Keegan for ending at this point. I think it was amazing, but I still really want to know what actually happened.
Is there yeah, I do. Is that like a planned sequel to come, or is that's the end?
That is the end. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and the film, which I say came out a couple of weeks ago, is amazing, and it really captures that claustrophobia of the book. And Cillian Murphy, who plays the lead character, is just extraordinary. And there's not that much dialogue in it, but he just says so much just with his acting. It's incredible.
Yeah. Sorry, what's it called again?
It is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. It was shortlisted for the Booker, I think, last year or maybe the year before last.
I will check that out. Thank you.
That's a great answer. And yeah, love that. So the next question, if you could take any character from fiction, again, TV, film, or books, which character would you take and use either in your own writing or just get to play around with and create something new in their world?
So I was thinking about all the amazing characters are in literature, but I went right back to a character who one of the first proper books I read when I was about 13, and it's Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And I love the character of Mrs. Danvers in that. And for those who don't know, Mrs. Danvers is the housekeeper in the De Winter home, and she ends up setting fire to the home and creating she's a very malevolent force in the novel, and just the most incredible person to go on an adventure with. I would just like to, the sort of person you'd go traveling with, and she would just do the craziest things. Like she'd be setting fire to the hostel that you were staying in. She'd be trying to kill other residents, and yeah, just an amazing person to go out and have a few drinks with, I think. So
wow.
Yeah, this is Danvers from Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier.
I love the idea of you going out in Brighton with that person who's going to set fire to everything and just cause chaos. Yeah.
I think she'd just be great. I'd like to travel around the world with her. That would be my adventure.
Wow. Can I just have a look at that book cover again, because you held it up?
So this is this is the first edition of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier.
Wow.
So yeah, I was very lucky to get this. So it's this is not the version I read as a child. So this is super old, but yeah, you can see how old it is.
Wow.
Jesus, that must be a very sought after book.
It's very precious to me, just because it was my favourite read at school.
Yeah. And what is on the front? Is it just like a signature, or
yeah,
I can't really see?
You probably can't see it. It just says,
oh yeah,
Rebecca.
Yeah, I can see that now. Yeah, lovely. Amazing. Okay, we got a question in from Anya, and she says, when is the worst time in history to write a historical fiction?
Oh, I do know. The thing that I found most surprising about historical fiction is how recent it is. A novel I'm writing at the moment is partly set in the 70s and 80s, and that is considered historical fiction, which seems a bit bonkers to me. But I would like to. The next novel I write, that I'm hopefully going to be writing at some stage next year, I want to set in the Second World War or around that time, because I think that's a really interesting period of history.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the worst is, because are there any boring parts of history? Because you kind of think the best parts of history make the most interesting stories, don't they? So like war and bloodthirstiness and things like that make for good stories. So I don't know what the worst time of history is.
It is a tough question. What do you think, Anya? Because you write historical fiction, so I'd like to know.
I reckon a novel, God, where you'd have to play around with dialogue because humans wouldn't speak a recognizable English or something like that. That would be quite challenging. I'm not saying you couldn't do it. Obviously you could, but I reckon that'd be just really problematic as a writer. Like, go back a couple of thousand years.
I think it probably is harder, just because there's the lack of research material to pull from. If I'm going back to the 80s, I remember the 80s really well. But I wrote the novel that my agent hated was set in the Great War, but in England, and that was harder to research, but not impossible. But if you go back like 4 or 5 centuries, you've got to do huge amounts of research, and there's sort of limited material to work from. So I think that's a challenge. It's not necessarily a worse type of history, but I think that's a good.
Did you say that's the one they hated?
Yes, I wrote one set in Edwardian England, and my agent hated it and rejected it with one line.
Have you ever pushed that anywhere else?
I might do, but I haven't read it for a couple of years now, and it's probably actually rubbish. And maybe she had a point. Who knows?
Well,
just one opinion. A lot of people could have loved it.
Yeah,
you're welcome to send that our way, and we'll try and get a read to it, because our guest last week definitely had that kind of rejection, and after multiple other attempts and other troubles, got a really good deal with that book. So
it gives me hope.
Like Chris said, it's one opinion. So I'm really intrigued to know if that book is actually of value to someone, or it's one person's opinion. At the time, didn't quite get that. So I wouldn't shelve it just now. See where that goes.
It's not going anywhere yet, but yeah, definitely. Why not? I mean, it's there. Do quite a lot of work on it. It's still there.
If you believed it and loved it, someone else will, I'm sure. Halo says, what is the best feedback you've ever gotten for your writing?
Oh, do you know what? I've had a couple of early reviews for this book, and one of them said there was 2 comments which I particularly loved, and one of them was, I have got a severe book hangover from this. And nothing else is going to kind of live up to this. I'm just laying there thinking about this book. And I was like, I loved that. And then the other one which came out, the review which came out yesterday, says something along the lines of, I really wish this book had already been made into a film so I could share it with all my relatives who don't read books. I thought, yes, go to Hollywood and tell them that they must make a film about my book. So I thought that was really lovely. But more generally, I've had like people, because I write mainly about mother-daughter relationships, and people just saying that's how it was for me and my mother, and your book really helped me understand it's okay not to have a good relationship with your mum. So those things, it just really makes it worthwhile.
Well, I've got the reviews open on Amazon in front of me, and some of them I've just flicked through, and they kind of need to be spoken about. Emotional, sad, shocking, tearful, reflective. Emotional because it covers every kind of emotion. Sad, so very sad with irreversible loss of love. Shocking, well, if you read this story, you'll know why. Tearful because of the life's losses. Reflective for my personality. For me personally, I'll say I miss my mum. So you're really relating to people there. Someone said they found this book hard to read, but it was even harder to put down. Gripping from the beginning to the end. Loved the story as it developed. Characters felt authentic. Loved the ending. What that speaks of is relating to people and their stories. A book that's really engaging, but hits all the emotions, which is incredibly hard to do, which you've clearly done. I think the readers are feeling very much connected to this book.
Cool. Oh, that's so lovely to hear, isn't it, when you read reviews like that?
Yeah.
Cathy, I was going to say, I think obviously only you could ever write that book, and having had the experiences that you've had, they've made you into the writer that you are, and obviously given you the ideas. But is it always a cathartic process? Because obviously you mentioned about the relationship you had with your own mum, and I think that's obviously a well that you're going into for that creativity. Are you ever worried when you're in the midst of putting a novel together, dealing with mother and daughter relationships as a theme? Are you ever worried that it's too much psychological stress on your own mind when you're writing? And again, what advice could you give to somebody who was tapping into what could potentially be a great source of creativity, but also a source of pain?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing, isn't it? Particularly for people who are doing memoir or life writing, but even with novel writing, because you are so close to it, and that is the power of that writing. But as you say, you can easily kind of distress yourself in that process, and certainly with The Girl in the Midnight Maze, there are bits of it that I find quite tough to read even now, because they are quite close to the bone. But I think it is about distancing yourself slightly from it, and rather than thinking about, oh, that's me doing that and that's my mother, they are the characters themselves, and making those characters quite different from you. So making them perhaps in a different age, or set in a different time or a different country, or whatever it is, but in some way noticeably different, so you can really recognize that difference and focus on that, so that they're emotionally true, but they are not necessarily factually true in terms of what happened or who those characters are.
Yeah, good question, Chris. I like that. Good answer. Okay, we are nearly 10 minutes over the show, which is always a great sign, always, and it happens when we have a great guest on. So Chris, do you want to wrap us up with, before we ask where we can get everything from, the most morbid question on the show, which you love to ask? So do you want to put that out there?
Yeah, so you're on your deathbed, you're looking back at your writing career. What would you be happy with? What is success to you?
Well, just to get actually one book out there has been bloody amazing. So I am really happy with that. But I would really like to have a shelf of my books, maybe 10 would be good, and to see that kind of growth in my writing. So I think I'm doing in the middle of this 3-book deal at the moment, and obviously when you're in a 3-book deal, you have to write 3 quite similar novels. And I'm really looking forward to the novel I write next, which I want to be like a far more historical fiction, and a more in-depth thing, and less, perhaps less issues-based, which my current writing is. So kind of just to see that trajectory of my writing improving and deepening. And yeah, maybe 10 published books would be cool.
Nice.
Wow. Yeah, I like that. You're on the journey. The one down, 9 to go. Brilliant. Where can people find information about yourself? Where can they buy your books? Where can they visit your bookshop? And all of that good stuff.
So I have a website, cathyhayward.co.uk, that you can find me out on, and I'm on Instagram and X and Facebook. Just search for Cathy Hayward author. Kemp Town Bookshop is in Brighton on the south coast of England. We do have a website, kemptownbookshop.co.uk, where you can order my book and other books, but otherwise your local indie bookshop or Amazon is really cool too. And please leave reviews, because that really matters to authors and helps spread the word.
It really does. Yeah. Thank you, Cathy. Yeah, the bookshop sounds wonderful. And if we can, we will try one day to make it down there. Because
we'll get the note first, and I'll make sure I'm there to make you a coffee.
Yeah, coffee is always good, especially for writers. By the way, if you're writing, do you have any writers kind of routines? Do you have a certain drink or certain snack you have when you're writing?
Oh yes, no, I'm really funny about that, and I have to have it all in a certain order. So I have a double espresso at 5, followed by a cup of tea, and another double espresso at 6, and another cup of tea, and a protein shake. Oh, I'm all very, I have to have it all in the same way, otherwise I feel the writing won't work.
So go double espresso tea, and protein shake.
Yeah.
Wow.
It gets me through 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
I could get on board with that, to be honest. It sounds good.
It does, definitely. Well, Cathy, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. You've been a brilliant guest, and your fire's gone out, by the way. You might not have noticed.
Oh no.
Yeah, you've been a brilliant guest, and your story is wonderful. And I do believe that there will be more published books in that journey and your dream that you have. And with what you're doing with other authors in the community, I think it's fantastic. So thank you for sharing your story and your tips with us. You've been a wonderful guest. So thank you from me.
Oh, thanks so much, both of you. It's been fun talking to you guys.
Brilliant. Chris, anything from you before we wrap this up?
No, just that I knew it was going to be another great emotional, because I did get emotional in parts of that, because I think obviously your writing provokes that type of reaction, but also inspirational as well. I love the fact that you're working in so many different fields and helping a community of people come together through books in lots of different ways. So that's brilliant. So again, thank you very much for coming on and chatting to us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, brilliant. And for you that tuned in live and being Substack members, thank you so much. It means the world to us. It helps us develop the show and support other authors. If you're listening back on this on YouTube, and on the podcast, and you want to be involved with the live shows, jump on our Substack and you can sign up there, and follow Cathy on all socials and support her by buying the book as well. But thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you all next week. So from us, it's goodbye. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend, everybody.